Blue eyes look rare because they are rare. Fewer than 1 in 12 people on the planet has them. And here is the part that sounds almost impossible. Whether that person grew up on a fjord in Norway, in a village outside Almaty, or on a street in Kabul, their eye color traces back to one single human being who lived somewhere between 6 and 10,000 years ago. One person, one copying error in their DNA. Every blue-eyed person alive today is, in a very real sense, that person's descendant. Recent genetic research has finally pinned down where this ancestor likely lived, what they probably looked like, and how their bloodline fanned out across 2 continents, in a way that upends a lot of the standard story about ancient Europe and Asia. Blue isn't actually a color. Start with a strange fact. There is no blue pigment anywhere in a human eye. What you're seeing in a pair of blue eyes is the same trick of physics that makes the sky blue. Light scattering, not paint. A blue iris simply has very little melanin in its outer layer, and thin, low-pigment tissue scatters light in a way that reads as blue to us. Strip away the melanin, and you're left with structural color, not chemical color. This single detail turns out to be the key to the whole mystery. One mutation, one person, no exceptions. If blue eyes were just low melanin happening randomly around the world, you'd expect the underlying DNA to look different from population to population. It doesn't. A landmark study out of the University of Copenhagen, led by geneticist Hans Eiberg, tested blue-eyed people from countries as far apart as Denmark, Turkey, and Jordan, and found the exact same genetic variant every time. Not a similar variant, the identical one. It sits near a gene called OCA2 on chromosome 15, the gene that governs how much brown pigment gets built into the iris. That kind of uniformity only happens one way. Everyone with blue eyes inherited the change from a single common ancestor. Not roughly the same region, not similar populations independently. One person, one event, copied forward through hundreds of generations into Vikings, Uyghurs, Afghans, Greeks, Irish farmers, and Brazilians alike. Following the trail backward, and it doesn't lead northward. The obvious guess is Scandinavia, since that's where blue eyes are most concentrated today. But ancient DNA tells a different story. The oldest skeletons carrying this mutation aren't from Ireland, Germany, or anywhere in Western Europe. They're from the grass belt north of the Black Sea, stretching from Ukraine through southern Russia, into the Caucasus foothills, and on into Central Asia. Geneticists call this stretch the Pontic-Caspian steppe, and it's ground zero for the mutation. What's even stranger is what these early carriers looked like. They weren't pale. La Braña man, a roughly 7,000-year-old hunter-gatherer skeleton found in Spain, had blue eyes set in skin as dark as a modern Central African's. Cheddar Man, unearthed in England and dated to about 10,000 years ago, told the same story when his DNA was sequenced in 2018. Dark skin, tightly curled dark hair, and pale blue eyes. The reconstruction shocked a lot of people who'd assumed ancient Britons looked like modern ones. Dark skin and blue eyes wasn't a contradiction back then. It was the original combination, long before lighter skin became common in Europe. The forgotten eastward migration. Here's the part most Western retellings skip entirely. The descendants of this ancestor didn't just spread west into Europe. They spread east too, across the Tian Shan Range, into the Tarim Basin, through the high desert of what's now western China, and the genetic fingerprints are still visible in living populations there. In the Pamir highlands of Tajikistan, some villagers have blue or light eyes, and features that don't fit neatly into European or East Asian categories. A signature of the same ancient steppe ancestry, carried east instead of west. The Wakhi people, living where Tajikistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and China meet, show similar traces. Among Afghanistan's Hazara, part Mongol, part much older Iranian stock, isolated mountain communities occasionally carry the same gene. Xinjiang's Uyghurs, whose ancestry blends European, Central Asian, and East Asian lineages, sometimes produce blue-eyed children, especially in the southern oases of the Tarim Basin, where desert-preserved mummies have been found, with light hair and unmistakably Western features. Then there's the Kalash, a tiny population in Pakistan's Hindu Kush, numbering only a few thousand. Many have fair skin, blonde or red hair, and pale blue eyes. They speak an old Indo-European language and still practice a pre-Islamic religion. Legend says they descend from Alexander the Great's soldiers. The genetics point instead to something far older, the Indo-Iranian migrations of roughly 4,000 years ago. The clearest proof came in 2021, when scientists sequenced DNA from the 4,000-year-old Tarim Basin mummies of the Taklamakan Desert. These weren't stray Europeans who'd wandered east. They were a local branch of the same ancient North Eurasian population that gave rise to so much of Eurasia's deep ancestry, proof that blue eyes were never strictly a European trait exported eastward, or an Asian trait that somehow reached Europe. It was older than either label, rooted in a population ancestral to both. How a single letter changed an eye color forever. Back to the mechanism. Next to OCA2 sits a regulatory switch called HERC2, which controls how strongly OCA2 gets expressed. Around 8,000-odd years ago, one letter changed in that switch. Not the gene itself, the dimmer switch controlling it. Melanin production dropped just enough that the iris stopped absorbing light and started scattering it, and blue eyes were born. Because this was such a precise, narrow change, it's essentially never happened twice, which is exactly why every blue-eyed person on Earth shares the same variant instead of dozens of similar ones. Why did such a specific, non-essential trait spread so widely? Nobody knows for certain. Some researchers suspect novelty made blue eyes attractive in small, isolated post-Ice Age communities, a striking, unusual feature that got noticed. Others think it hitchhiked alongside other traits that were actually being selected for. Still others chalk it up to plain genetic drift, amplified by population booms during the early agricultural era. Whatever the reason, the outcome is undeniable. It kept spreading wherever people migrated, traded, and intermarried. And because of how ancestry compounds over deep time, the same distant ancestors reappearing again and again in anyone's family tree once you go back far enough, even a small dose of steppe ancestry is enough to carry the chance of inheriting that mutation. Blue eyes cluster most heavily in Northern Europe today, not because that's where the mutation began, but because smaller, more isolated populations there let the gene concentrate over generations. Elsewhere, in larger, more mixed populations, it got diluted but never erased. Riders of the steppe. The people who carried this gene across Eurasia weren't obscure footnotes. They were some of history's most consequential populations. The Yamnaya, steppe pastoralists who domesticated the horse and pioneered wheeled transport around 3000 to 5000 BCE, expanded in every direction, seeding ancestry into nearly every modern European population to the west, and reaching Central Asia and China's western fringe to the east. Later, the Scythians left blue-eyed, red-haired remains in burial sites across Kazakhstan and Mongolia. The Tocharians, who built trading cities along the Silk Road in the Tarim Basin, wrote in a language more closely related to Latin and Celtic than to anything spoken by their neighbors. A linguistic puzzle that only makes sense once you account for the same steppe migrations. The Sakas, the Massagetae, the Wusun, all carried strands of this same inheritance into the heart of Asia, a shared inheritance. If you have blue eyes, your ancestry isn't the tidy, single-region story you might have assumed. It runs through the steppe nomads of Kazakhstan, the mountain communities of the Pamirs, the desert oases of the Silk Road, and the hunter-gatherers of ancient Siberia, just as much as it runs through Northern Europe. It's a genetic thread linking a Tajik grandmother, a Uyghur child in Kashgar, a Hazara boy in the Bamiyan Valley, and an Irish farmer, not through coincidence or recent contact, but through one shared ancestor whose mutation is still visibly alive, thousands of years and thousands of kilometers later. It's worth sitting with that for a second. Every blue-eyed person you've ever met is, quite literally, a distant cousin of every other blue-eyed person on Earth, connected through one real human being who lived roughly 8,000 years ago on the edge of the Black Sea, or perhaps further out on the Central Asian grasslands. Their face is lost to history. Their genetic signature is not. It's still looking back at you every time you meet someone's blue eyes.